We're in a series now called Live to Give. And we have actually been talking the whole month of November about how God has actually hardwired human beings to be generous. And we studied last weekend in particular that we flourish when we're generous. We're every category of health, of quality of life, of happiness, it improves when we're generous. And conversely, at every level, we're impoverished when we are not generous. And it's already been pointed out, but you probably noticed that so far in the worship gathering today, we've not done something that we usually do. And what is that we've not done yet? We've not taken the offering. And some of you were hoping I hadn't noticed that. But this was deliberate. You know, we talk often in our worship planning times about how we can make our entire time in this gathering, that's what this is. This is a gathering of people. How can we make this a seamless time of worship? And, you know, often our language gets confusing and it betrays what we truly believe about the subject of worship. For example, most of us equate the musical portion of our gathering as the worship time. And so we say things like this: I really enjoyed the worship today. The worship today was really good. Or the worship today was a little off, a little too loud, a little too repetitive. And we're almost exclusively talking about the music. Conversely, many people see what I'm doing now as the teaching time. This is the preaching portion of the service. And we see it as two totally separate events. But that's not accurate. More importantly, it's not biblical. All of the elements of the worship gathering contribute to worship of God. It's all worship, including our giving. Giving is something we do to express our love and devotion to God, but we usually don't think of it in that way. We don't talk as much about it. You know, we do often think of, what should I do during the offering? How is that worship? What's that moment supposed to be like if it's a worship time? And I got to be honest with you, the emergence of online giving further complicates what this moment is supposed to be for many of us. We encourage online giving. My wife and I do most all of our giving online, and over 40% of our offerings are now received by giving online. But the question then remains, so what do we do with this moment when the offering is being collected, if that describes you? How can we leverage this as a meaningful time of worship, including the offering? So I have an idea. I'll tell you where it started at. Back in 2007, I traveled to Kampala, Uganda. That's a kind of a eastern central country, almost in the middle of the continent of Africa. And I spoke before the largest church crowd that I have ever spoken in front of. I'll just look at this picture and you get a sense of the crowd that day. This was just one of the services. I spoke at 2 of the 3 worship services that morning. There was over 10,000 people that were at those services. The church is called Christian Life Ministries. Each morning service was 2.5 hours long, and I'm not kidding. It was in the summer. The structure was huge. It was like a warehouse, as you saw in the picture. It had no air conditioning. I spoke through a translator, which is always a challenge. I would say a sentence or two, and then he would say a paragraph or two. And I came to believe that he was not relaying what I was saying, that he was just saying what he wanted. But the people seemed to like it, and so I just played along with it. However, I got to tell you, the best part of the service, the absolute highlight, was actually offering. It came after the preaching. The pastor started connecting their giving to worship, and gratitude and expressing our love to God. He did a 15-minute message on how giving is an act of worship, and then he led them to give. Now, what you're about to see, I apologize for. I took this video with a flip camera or a phone. I can't remember what I had at the time, so it's a little jerky, but I just wanted you to get a sense of what it was like in the room right before they took the offering. Just look at this video. And they're getting ready to give the offering. Now, here's the point. When it came time to give their offering, they didn't pass a bucket or a bag or a plate. The way things worked in that church was people would get up out of their seats and they would walk down to the front and they would put money in baskets located around the front of the worship building. And it wasn't a discreet, like you're giving somebody a tip on the sly and you didn't want your money to be seen. I mean, this was a very visible act. I remember watching some people literally dancing down the aisle. I mean, they're waving their money over their head like this. They were just jubilant. It was clear from the surroundings of the building and the fact that almost everyone there walked or rode a bicycle or a city bus to get there. It was clear most of these folks did not have very much to live on. So here's the dynamic. The offering, instead of being a moment when they went kind of on autopilot or were bored or thinking about something else, was actually a time of what could only be described as a defiant declaration of joy. A defiant declaration of joy. The reason there was such a spirit of celebration is those people were saying, you might think, and the world might think, and the devil might think that because of my financial challenges, this world has got the best of me, and that all I am is a pile of need, but I'm not. That's not true about me. I have something to give. I have something to bring. I have something to offer. I get to partner with God to help somebody else. I'm one of the strong ones. I'm one of the givers. I'm not just a taker. There were 7 Americans, including me, on that trip, 2 of which were former NBA player Allen Houston and his father, Wade Houston, who's the former men's head basketball coach of Tennessee. All of us were overwhelmed at this powerful moment. And that's where I learned that giving, when it's done right, is a form of dancing. So I thought I would talk for a few moments this weekend on how to turn giving into dancing. And then when I'm done, we're going to form kind of an old school Soul Train line. And we're going to Dougie down the aisle or moonwalk. We'll watch you whip, we'll watch you nay-nay. And I don't even know what I'm saying. Doesn't that sound like fun? Not so much, huh? All right, we're really not going to do that. But when the offering time comes, I hope we'll all dance metaphorically. I hope that we'll give whatever we're going to offer to God today with a spirit of joy and gratitude and trust. And for those of us who give online, we put a card inside of the compass today that says, this card represents my giving, whether it's online. Some of you may give monthly or bi-monthly, and you've already done that this month. But I don't want anybody to miss out on the giving party that we're going to do here. So we put this inside of your compass today, and you can just bring this forward, and I'll explain that more in just a moment. But I want everybody to be able to participate in the joy of giving today. I want you to take a look at a passage that Paul writes in his second letter to the church at Corinth. And he says something interesting, but look at what he says here. He says, but since you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in complete earnestness, and in this love we have kindled in you, see that you also excel in this grace of giving. There are two words that describe two dynamics in giving that I think are so striking in this passage because we don't often see giving in this light. One of them is the word excel. This is an unusual word when it comes to the subject of giving. Excel at giving. Don't just do it. Excel at it. Pay attention to it. Study it. Practice it. Work on it. Just like people work super hard to excel in their work or in their leadership development or in their studies or with a hobby, aim at excellence in generosity. Most of us don't think of giving like that, do we? Excel at the grace of giving. And then Paul doesn't say, excel in your obligation to give. He doesn't say excel in your duty to give or excel because there's pressure on you to give. No, he says excel in the grace. Everybody say that word with me. Grace of giving. In other words, he's saying don't be a gritted teeth giver. You know what I'm talking about? A gritted teeth giver. I'm thinking of Clint Eastwood right now in my mind. He says, go ahead, punk. Take my offering. Not so good. In other words, don't give with clenched fists. Don't ask, how much do I have to give? How much am I supposed to give? How much must I give? Turn your giving into dancing. Excel at the grace of giving. Because giving, when done properly, is a fabulous exercise in spiritual formation. So I want us to spend a few moments on this thought right now. What can we do as a church to excel in the grace of giving? Here's a few observations. People who excel in the grace of giving learn to live contently within the means of God's provision for their lives. People who excel at the grace of giving learn to live contently within the means of God's provision for their lives. We see this from Paul's letter to the church at Philippi when he wrote, I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through Him who gives me strength. So Bill Hybels is a pastor at one of the largest churches in America in Chicago, and he kind of draws it out like this. This line, green line, kind of represents the ebb and flow of God's provision in our life, how God provides for us, particularly on the subject of finances right now. And I want you to notice it's not a straight line. It's normally not a line that just flat or goes down or goes up all the time. There's an ebb and a flow. And that's what Paul is talking about when he says, I know what it is to be hungry, kind of at the bottom, and to be well fed. I know what it is to have plenty. I know what it is to be in need. So there's kind of an ebb and flow to the provision that God makes for us in our lives. So one of the things that we should do if we're good stewards and good managers is that we should have a spending plan that goes underneath the provision, kind of like that. We want to have a spending plan that allows us to have some margin between what God provides and what we spend. And Paul makes the case in this passage that margin or that saving, he says, you should lay by in store. In other words, you should save some stuff. And why does he encourage the church at Corinth to save? So that they can give when the opportunity to arises. And he talks about them laying by in store. And now it's about time to collect it. If you got some margin in your life, and some of us maybe have some real serious margin between God's provision and how we're living, then we should be able to be even more generous. Melinda and I today, as we make our 1-year anniversary gift to the Promise campaign, we've been saving up all year just so we could make this gift. Now, I want to say this to you. When you have some margin between God's provision and between your spending, you know what that's called? It's called peace. It's called financial peace. When your load is less than your limit, then you have some peace. Now, at the root of debt, Hybels explains it like this. At the root of debt is the idea, I don't know that I can make it on just what God is bringing right now. So I've got to do something different to kind of help him out, or in case he's missed the memo about what I should be getting. And so what color would show debt? How about red, okay? So here's what many of us do. Hey, God, I think somewhere along the way, I really should be having a provision level that looks more like this. And I think what I really need in my life is more. I need more house, more car, more stuff, more possessions. I need more than what I'm seeing on the green line right now. So I'm going to kind of force some things. I'm going to DEBT, dumb explanation for buying things. I'm going to go in debt. Okay? Because I don't believe what God has provided for me is enough. That's at the root of debt. I want this provision level, not this provision level. We live in a world where it's so easy to live that way, right? It's so easy. Hey, this past week, I got to share with you, was a big week for me. I got a special letter in the mail. And inside the letter, it says, "Congratulations, John Hampton. We have checked your credit background and we have very good news for you." It turns out I have personally been selected for a credit line of thousands of dollars. And look, it's a limited time offer. I better act fast. Bet you didn't get a letter like this. Oh, you did? I thought I was special. I thought I was the only one. USA Today had an article last year that said that credit card companies send out 4 billion solicitations every year. That's the equivalent of 16 of these letters to every man, woman, and child living in the United States of America. If you have a pulse, you got one of these. You hear more from these people than you hear from relatives in your family. And it may be that the primary problem that keeps a lot of people from excelling at the grace of giving is the debt problem. Debt makes people live with a constant sense of financial pressure and bondage. This is from the book of Proverbs. Proverbs 22:7. Let's read this out loud together. Would you read it with me? "The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender." Debt is a form of slavery. I can't tell you how many stories I have heard from people who get in over their heads financially, and what comes next is shame. People who have wanted to be honest their whole life find themselves telling lies. People who have always paid their bills on time and have been straightforward in their business dealings start to break commitments and they start to betray trust. People who would otherwise be courageous end up living in fear of being found out, and they start evading, they start avoiding, they start spending. Somewhere in their house there's probably a drawer of unpaid bills or unopened notices from the IRS or unopened letters from collection agencies. There's a drawer of shame somewhere. And I want to say to you today, if you're feeling that kind of pressure today, let me say this. There's no shame here. There's no guilt here. At the cross of Jesus, He died to set us free from shame and guilt and sin, and that includes the financial area of life. And I believe that you can, if you want to, you can put a stake in the ground on this one today, and you can declare, I'm done living a debt-based lifestyle. I'll cut up my credit cards if I need to. I'm going to get counsel from a wise financial advisor. As Dave Ramsey says, I'm going to start acting my wage. I will get on a plan that leads to freedom. I'm not going to live in financial bondage anymore. I will learn to live gratefully within the provision that God has given for my life. I want to tell you, we're going to be offering, I'm excited about this, in January of 2016, a new course. It's actually kind of a recycled course. It used to be called Crown Financial Bible Study. Now it's called the Compass, Navigating Your Finances Bible Study. Compass, I think, is without doubt the best Bible study. Now, there's a lot of great financial courses out there, but I believe it's the best Bible study on finances that I've ever participated in. We sometimes talk about God's economy. You hear that in church, that what does that mean? What is God's economy? Compass will explain what it means to live in God's economy. You will look at hundreds of scriptures on the subject of finances that cover topics such as debt and honesty and spending and budgeting and getting wise counsel and teaching your children wise financial practices and giving and being ready for a crisis. And I'm excited to tell you that next weekend here at our Apopka campus, the author of the Crown Compass material is a man named Howard Dayton. And Howard will be speaking next weekend at our Apopka campus. This is an honor. It really is. I'm so excited that Howard will be able to come and to share with us. And you can stop by today at the atrium, in the table in the atrium, and you can sign up for the Compass course or find out more information about the Compass course that's coming in January of 2016. But here's what I want to say again. People who excel at the grace of giving learn to live contently within the means of God's provision for their lives. Secondly, people who excel at the grace of giving view their present resources from an eternal perspective. People who excel in the grace of giving view their present resources from an eternal perspective. Jesus said it like this: do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moth and rust do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Jesus is just making a statement here about the way we work, and here's how we work. When we invest our treasure someplace, and when we put our money somewhere, if I put my money in my house or in my boat or in my condo at the beach or up in the mountains, in my possessions, then that's where my heart, that's where my interest, that's where my attention will go. It just does. If I invested in other areas, my heart, my attention will go there. People who excel in the grace of giving understand there are two great categories when it comes to treasure. There is temporal or temporary and eternal. And it would be so good in so many areas of our lives if we could just remember from a couple of weekends ago when I had all that stuff up here, the dollhouse and the car and the golf club and the cell phone, and we had some stickers. And if you haven't seen that message, I encourage you to go back 2 weekends ago and watch it. And I took a red sticker, you remember? And I put on each of those items, temporary, temporary, temporary. And it's just a reminder that it's just what Jesus said. Jesus said all that stuff is just a pile of rust waiting to happen. It's just moth food waiting to be eaten. Why would you get all wrapped up in what's just temporary? Think of it like this. Nobody would rent a hotel room for a couple of nights and pay to have it redecorated in a really expensive way. It's just temporary short-term housing. Nobody rents a car for a day and pays to have it detailed because it's just temporary transportation. It's not your car anyway. Pastor Greg Laurie shares the following story of an older woman who had finished Christmas shopping, and she returned to her car with her packages, and when she got there, she found 4 men inside the car, and she dropped her bags, and she drew a handgun out of her purse, and she screamed, "I have a gun, I know how to use it, get out of the car." Well, these men did not wait for a second invitation. They got out, they ran like crazy. The woman, somewhat shaken, loaded her bags into her car, but no matter how hard she tried, she could not get her key into the ignition. And then it dawned on her, her car was parked 4 or 5 spaces away. And so she loaded her bags into her own car, and she drove to the police station, and she turned herself in. And the desk sergeant to whom she told the story nearly fell off his chair laughing. He pointed to the other end of the counter where 4 men were reporting a carjacking at a shopping center by a grandma with a gun. And no charges were filed. You see, she thought it was her car, but it really belonged to someone else. None of our stuff really belongs to us. It's temporary. Temporary. What's eternal? There's a writer by Randy Alcorn. His name is Randy Alcorn, and he sometimes pictures it like this. He says that, let's picture a line that has no end this way and no end this way, and that line is eternity. And there's a little dot right here, and that dot represents my life and your life. It has a beginning point, it has an end point. And it goes by really, really fast. And so Alcorn says, don't live for the dot, live for the line. Don't aim for the dot, aim for the line. Don't get your heart all wrapped up in just that little dot right there. People who excel at the grace of giving view their present resources from an eternal perspective. Number 3, people who excel in the grace of giving choose their financial goals wisely. They choose their financial goals wisely. In other words, they get very intentional about their financial lives because this odd thing happens to us. Some of you who are parents will remember this. Remember the very first child and the very first time that your very first child had their first tantrum. I mean, they're this sweet, cute, lovable, adorable infant, and one day, when most haven't reached 2 years of living on this greedy planet, without any training, without any prompting, a word comes out of your precious little baby like a volcano. And that word is usually mine. And they get red in the face. And they start trembling. And they become clutchy and greedy and angry and sometimes violent. My wife watches our grandson 3 days a week. He's 19 months old now. This was a couple of months ago. She told him not to do something. He kept doing it. She told him again, don't do that. He kept doing it. And finally she said again, Hampton, that's his name, Hampton, stop it. And he looked at her and he said, I want to. And he can't even talk. We're not even sure he knows what he's saying. But that came out of somewhere. I want to. We're going to have some fun with him, aren't we? And you think to yourself, where did this come from? Who passed this selfish gene on to my innocent, precious child? And you try to think which one of your in-laws to blame. And you're pretty sure you know which one. Here's the interesting truth about kids. Now listen, no kid ever had to be taught the word mine. Have you ever noticed that? No 2-year-old ever looked at a parent and said, now exactly how do I clutch things? How do I grab something from someone else? No, we have to teach them yours. We have to learn ours, and we have to learn share, but no kid ever had to be taught the word mine. Here's what I found. People who excel at the grace of giving, and by the way, so many of you do. You get really clear on your financial life in general, including your savings, but especially on your goals for giving. The default condition of the human heart is to hoard and avoid sharing with anyone. That is the default condition of the human heart. That's why intrinsically inside a little baby, they don't have to be taught mine. It's the default condition. People who excel at giving get really clear and they get really intentional about their giving. Listen to me. People who do not excel in the grace of giving stay fuzzy on their finances. I have learned that people who don't excel in the grace of giving, they kind of live in a financial fog. How much did you give last year? I don't know. How much did you plan to give this year? I don't know. How much will you save? I don't know. How much do you spend? I don't know. How much is your debt? I don't know. People who excel in the grace of giving give because they decided to give. People who usually didn't decide to not give. They didn't just decide to give. Did you follow that? Let me say that again. People who excel in the grace of giving give because they decided to give. People who don't usually didn't decide to not give. They just didn't decide to give. So they live in this financial fog. Chuck Feeney is the man who started duty-free shops. If you've traveled internationally, you see in airports around the globe a duty-free shop where you can buy stuff. A lot of it's liquor and cigarettes and electronic merchandise, things like that. But you don't have to pay a duty on it. Or perfume. He made a fortune. He was listed a few decades ago by Forbes magazine as one of the 20th richest people in the world. Turns out his fortune was actually larger than anybody thought, because he had already quietly given his fortune away to a foundation that was devoted to philanthropy. One writer called Chuck Feeney the James Bond of philanthropy. The foundation has now given away over $6 billion. It has about $1.6 billion more to give away, and it will be the largest foundation ever to give itself out of existence, and that's projected to happen in 2016. A more recent Forbes article about Chuck Feeney was called "The Billionaire Who's Trying to Go Broke." Feeney estimates that he's worth altogether about $2 million. He wears a $15 wristwatch. He uses a plastic bag for a briefcase. And he said his ultimate financial goal is this: I want the last check I write to bounce. And some of you are thinking, hey, I'm bouncing checks right now. I'm already there and I ain't even dead yet. People who excel in the grace of giving get really clear. I want to give away so much that when I get to the end and write the last check, there's nothing left in the account, because I've just wanted to enrich God's world and I wanted to make a difference in people's lives. Friends, get really clear on what you want to do, on what your goals are around giving and around spending and around saving. Get your head out of this fuzzy thinking about your finances. There's no life in fuzzy. There's no effectiveness in fuzzy. There are people who spend their whole lives in a financial fog, and it will lead to a debt or shame, but it will never lead to excellence in the grace of giving. Number 4, people who excel in the grace of giving associate generosity with joy. They associate generosity with joy. It actually makes them happy to give. You know, so many people in churches associate the word money with guilt. they come to church and there's a sermon series about money or about giving, they just assume I'm going to feel guilty about how I handle it. I'm going to feel guilty about what I'm giving or what I'm not giving. I'm going to feel guilty really about how much I want money. And guilt generally doesn't do a whole lot of good in creating excellence in the grace of giving or in any other matter for that life. So as we come to the close of this message, and as we get ready to worship through bringing our tithes and giving our offering, I want to say again, this is a guilt-free zone, a shame-free zone. Because over and over in the Bible, a connection is made between generosity and joy. Over and over, we see people who excel in the grace of giving, experiencing great joy. In the same letter to the church at Corinth that we've looked at, Paul says this. Look at what he says. We want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. In the midst of a very severe trial, now notice this phrase very carefully, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. What? Seriously, Paul? We live in a world that the culture says the more you get, the happier you'll be. The idea of overflowing joy and extreme poverty, really? Yeah. In the Old Testament, there was a huge burst of generosity that we're told about in the book of 1 Chronicles. And look at what it says. The people rejoiced at the willing response of their leaders. You see, when we see generosity, it inspires us. Greed never inspired anybody. For they had given freely and wholeheartedly to the Lord. David the king also rejoiced greatly. King David has this line in a prayer that he offers in that section that I just love. And David says this. He says, who am I, O God, that I should be able to give like this? Who am I? And who are these people that we should be able to do this? You ever ask yourself that? Why is it you've given me so much and there's so much need? Who am I that I'm able to give like this? And the whole deal behind this tithe challenge over this 90-day period that we've talked about in this series is just to try to encourage anybody who's willing, not forcing, but anybody who's willing to know the joy of giving. And that's why I'm so unapologetic about this topic. Why I love to talk about it. It'll change your life. It changed my life. And I want to say again that tithing is not a magic way to solve money problems. Tithing is not a tricky way to get rich. There are no guaranteed outcomes around this one. It's not a spiritual way to try to be self-indulgent. In fact, if your motives are selfish, then you're just at odds with the kingdom of God. But I want to tell you this. It is true. You cannot outgive God. I want to tell you this. It is true. It's more blessed to give than to receive. I want to tell you this, it is true, give and it will be given to you. That's just how the kingdom of God works, friends. I have to tell you, when people get it and they start excelling in the grace of giving, it inspires me. It fires me up. And I just want to say, God, I want to be generous. I want to challenge our church without apology to be generous. If God has blessed you with resources, get serious about this. All this leads back to the offering that we're about to take. So, what should be the spirit in the room when we bring our tithes and give him our offerings? What should that moment be like? Well, here's what Paul wrote. Each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. The Greek word translated cheerful, Paul uses there, is hilarion. We get our word hilarious from that word. This is the only time it's used in the New Testament. And Paul's making the case that offering ought to be hilarious. God loves it when people get freed up from greed and worry and filled up with love and trust. They give with joy and they laugh and they come dancing and saying, I'm one of the rich ones. I'm one of the strong ones. I'm one of the givers. I'm not just a taker. So guilt-free zone. We're going to take an offering in a moment. Maybe this is your first time here. All this sounds strange. all this sounds very new to you, and you might be, if you're a first-time guest, I don't know that I could give with joy today. And I would say, just set this one out. You're our guest. Maybe you've been coming here for years, and you've never really given, and you would say, I don't know that I can give with joy. Sometimes you got to prime the pump a little bit, people. I mean, if I've been coming here a long time, and if I got to wait till I feel like giving, I might wait for a longer time. I might just need to start by being obedient. I might have to tell God, God, my desire is to become a joyful giver. Maybe I don't want to give yet, but I want to give. You understand? I want that. I want that kind of heart. What would it be like if we closed out this series that we've been doing all month, if we gave God the greatest offering in the history of our church? I don't mean the largest. I don't mean the biggest amount that has more zeros behind it. I mean the most grateful, the most thoughtful, the most celebrated, the most trusting, the most faith-filled, the most hilarious, the most cheerful offering in our history. You know, in our culture, people cheer for the goofiest stuff, don't they? People will go crazy this weekend cheering at a football game when two guys are trying to give each other a concussion. They'll cheer like crazy. People will cheer at boxing matches where one man or woman is trying to batter the other one into unconsciousness. We cheer for that. People cheer on game shows for somebody else getting money. The New York Stock Exchange opens every day with a little bell ceremony. You ever seen the opening bell of the New York Stock Exchange? People go crazy when the bell rings. Sometimes celebrities and dignitaries show up and they ring the bell and everybody cheers for the opportunity to get more money. So one time, why couldn't we actually cheer the giving of money? Why couldn't we cheer the giving of generous gifts to an unbelievably generous God? So here's how it's going to work. We have 4 giving stations on the stage, including the 2 promise stations on the end to lessen congestion. And in any one of the 4, you can bring your tithes and offerings, or if you've brought an anniversary gift for the promise, put it in. It doesn't have to go into the promise containers. It can go into any one of the baskets here. We're also going to have a couple of baskets in the back aisle here in case it gets too congested up here. And you can put your commitment. If you are new to us in the past year and you're making a new commitment to the promise, then you can put your card along with your gift inside of either one of those. Or if you've already given online, just don't miss the party. Bring the card up and put it here. I don't want us to cheer mindlessly. I want to say this before we give. Listen, in light of all of God's unending and ceaseless gifts to us, and as a way of saying thank you to Him, as a way of expressing my trust in my provider, and in order to extend His kingdom, because what we give now will help little children know Jesus loves them, and will help grown men and women know Jesus can save them, and will help hungry people know Jesus gives them food for life, and to help addicted people know there's a greater power than my addiction, and to help the good news be preached in places all around the world. And friends, you and I get to be a part of that. And I want to tell you something else. There will be acts of heroic, faithful generosity going on in this room in just a moment that you don't know anything about, but it truly deserves to be cheered by us, because there will be somebody who doesn't have a job and they're giving out of great need, but they're saying in a defiant declaration of joy, I'm a giver. There will be a widow on fixed income, but she's giving. And there will be a single mom who lives on a tight budget, but she gives. And there will be people who have been devoted, who've been very careful with their finances so that they're able to give. And I want us to just stand right now. Let's stand. And I'm going to read a portion of King David's prayer from 1 Chronicles 29. And then the music is going to start, and it's going to be a little more joy and raucous music than we normally have. And last night, I saw a few people kind of shimmying down the aisle there. Kind of worried me a little bit, but that's all right. But it's okay. I want us to give. I want you to listen to David's prayer. And let's close with this. And then let's worship and let's give. David says, praise be to you, Lord, the God of our father Israel. From everlasting to everlasting, yours, Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the majesty and the splendor, for everything in heaven and earth is yours. Yours, Lord, is the kingdom. You are exalted as head over all. Wealth and honor come from you. You are the ruler of all things. In your hands are strength and power to exalt and give strength to all. Now, our God, we give you thanks and we praise your glorious name, and we joyfully bring to you whatever it is you've entrusted to us today. And we all agreed and said,